Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at a practice test to help us with our Unit 1 Paper 1 test that's coming up. So let's get straight into these questions. I'm going to put a link in the description for you to access this test. It'll be downloadable free of charge. So remember at the end of the video to go and get that link so that you can get a copy of this test. So the first question, number 1, the production possibility curve for an economy producing goods X and Y is shown below, and they want to know which points will be attainable. A, T only, B, S only, C, S and R only, or D, R, T and S only. The answer is D, R, T and S only. Right, and the reason for this is all attainable points lie on or within the PPC curve. So R, T and S will meet those requirements. The second question deals with another PPC curve. So questions 2 and 3 refer to the PPC we're seeing here. So number 2 is asking which of the following statements about the points is true. A, R is inefficient. B, P is technically inefficient. C, T is productively inefficient. Or D, M is allocatively inefficient. The answer is C, T is productively inefficient. All points within the PPC are inefficient and T is one of those points. Question 3. If point P moves to point S, so let's look to see what T and S is. So T is within and S is on the boundary. So if point P moves to point S, then one can safely assume that A, the prices of raw materials have increased. B, the level of technology has not increased. C, adverse weather conditions have caused damage to factor inputs. D, available resources have been fully utilized. The answer is D, available resources have been fully utilized. So all points on the boundary, actually on the PPC, are in full use. Next we move on to question 4. Which of the following situations is most likely to result when a choice has been made? A, there will be an increase in resources. B, there will be an opportunity cost. C, more people will become unemployed. Or D, more persons will become wealthy. The answer is B, there will be an opportunity cost. Right, and if you remember, choices lead to opportunity cost. And I would have done a video explaining that previously. Question 5. If a country cannot produce more of one good without having to produce less of another, then A, it is productively inefficient. B, it should allocate more of its resources to the production of consumer goods. C, an increase in technology is not possible. Or D, the opportunity cost of producing each good is constant. The answer is A, it is productively efficient. This question refers to all points on the PPC. For example, if the economy is at point S, it's not possible to get more of good X without giving up production of good Y. So it will be productively efficient. So question 6 refers to the production possibility frontier we have below there. And it's asking which of the following is most likely to cause the curve to change from 1 to 2. A, a decrease in wheat due to adverse weather conditions. B, negative publicity on the effects of consuming peanut butter. C, an increase in the number of bakers. Or D, an increase in the price of peanuts. The answer would be A, a decrease in wheat due to adverse weather conditions. So the explanation for this, less wheat means less bread can be produced. So production of bread will decrease from 1 to 2. There's no effect on peanut butter, so that's why we have a pivoting of the curve and not an entire shift. Question 7. The use of land to construct schools reduces the amount available for agricultural production. This statement best illustrates the concept of A. Rationing, B. Scarcity, C. Economic growth, or D. Shortage. The answer is B. Scarcity. So we have to remember that land is finite or limited resource with varying uses competing for it. A shortage, on the other hand, is a market condition where we have quantity demanded being greater than quantity supplied. So you have to be careful that we don't mix up scarcity and shortage. It's not the same thing. Question 8. Which of the following statements is an example of a normative statement? A. An increase in the price of sugary beverages will lead to inflation. B. Sugary beverages should not be sold to children. C. An increase in VAT will lead to unemployment. D. Excessive consumption of sugary beverages will damage your health. The answer is B. Sugary beverages should not be sold to children. And how you would know it's a normative statement is because it's based on a value judgment, and it's also easy to recognize because it's a statement that will have the word should in it, for example. So if you look at all the other options, you'd see should is not there, but should is in part B. So that's a giveaway. So normative statements would have words like should in them. Number 9, in a mixed economy, production is A. For both the domestic and foreign markets. B. Consisting of primary production and secondary production. C. Determined by the decisions of both households and firms. D. Determined by both the price mechanism and the state. The answer is D. Determined by both the price mechanism and the state. This is hinged on both the private and the public sector. So the price mechanism is leaning to that private sector where we have households and firms interacting, and then we have the public sector or the state or the government, right? Means the same thing. So number 9, D. Question 10. A straight line production possibility frontier means that A. The marginal rate of substitution is constant for both goods. B. Utility is maximized by specializing in the production of one good. C. Increasing opportunity costs as more of one good is produced. D. The factors of production are more efficiently employed in the production of one type of good than in the production of another type of good. The answer would be A. The marginal rate of substitution is constant for both goods. And I did a video previously explaining straight line PPC curves. So you could refer to that if you want further explanation. Question 11. Which of the following can result in an outward shift of an economy's production possibility frontier? A. A decrease in government expenditure on education. B. An increase in inflation. C. An increase in the labor force. D. A decrease in unemployment levels. The answer is C. An increase in the labor force. So an increase in the labor force increases the productive capacity, so the PPC will shift outwards. Number 12. The demand curve for a product will tend to shift outwards if there is A. An increase in demand for complementary good. B. An increase in demand for substitute good. C. An improvement in the efficiency of labor. Or D. A fall in the price of the product. The answer is A. An increase in demand for complementary good. So you have to remember complementary good or complementary goods rather, they go hand in hand with each other. So for example, there'll be like laptops and software. So if there's an increase in demand for laptops, there'll be an increase in demand for software, and the demand curve for software will shift to the right. So the answer here wouldn't be D, for example, because price falls would cause movements along the demand curve and not shifts. So the answer is A. Number 13. What is the likely effect of an increase in the price of closed substitutes? So A, the demand for the product remains constant. B, the demand curve for the product shifts to the right. C, the demand curve for the product shifts to the left. Or D, the price of the product increases. The answer is B, the demand curve for the product shifts to the right. And how we know there's close substitutes, they could replace one for the other. So for example, we'll have like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. So if the price of Coca-Cola increases, the quantity demanded of Coca-Cola will fall and persons will demand more Pepsi. And so the demand curve for Pepsi will shift to the right. Question 14. The price elasticity of demand for a good is likely to be high when A, the good is seldom bought. B, the good is addictive. C, the expenditure on the good is a small part of total expenditure. Or D, the good has many substitutes. Answer would be D, the good has many substitutes. So when a good is very elastic, it means it's very responsive to price changes. So any change in price, consumers can easily switch between any of the many substitutes. So that's how you know is when it's very elastic. Question 15. Which of the following best explains the term consumer surplus? A, the amount by which revenue exceeds expenditure. B, the value of public goods provided free to consumers. C, the amount of money consumers would be prepared to pay for a good in excess of what they pay. D, the area under the demand curve for a good. The answer is C. The amount of money consumers would be prepared to pay for a good in excess of what they pay. Right, if we had to illustrate this on a diagram, this would be the area above the price line but bounded by the demand curve. Question 16. Which of the following is not consistent with perfect competition? A, many buyers and sellers. B, advertising by individual firms. C, firms are price takers. D, firms produce homogeneous goods. The answer is B, advertising by individual firms. So in perfect competition, individual firms do not advertise. The other options, A, C, and D are all features of perfect competition. So this was a process of elimination. You could have figured this one out. The statement is correct about social costs. A, social costs equal marginal costs. B, social costs equal average costs. C, social costs equal private costs plus external costs. D, social costs equal private costs minus external costs. The answer is C, social costs equal private costs plus external costs. So you just have to remember the formula there for social costs. Question 18. In a perfectly competitive industry, a profit maximizing firm will shut down in the short run if A, marginal cost is greater than average revenue. B, average cost is greater than average revenue. C, average revenue is less than average variable cost. D, average fixed cost is greater than average revenue. The answer is C, average revenue is less than average variable cost. So here we need to look at the AVC for the shutdown point. So a firm might be making losses, but once it covers its AVC, it will continue to produce. If they're not covering their AVC, they will shut down. Question 19. What is a free good? A, one which is provided freely by the state. B, one which is not relatively scarce. C, one paid for by direct taxes. D, one whose total costs are zero. So the answer here would be B, one which is not relatively scarce. And an example of this would be air, the air that we breathe, that would be considered as a free good. It's abundant everywhere. So you don't have to pay for the air. That would be a free good. So now we're going to move on to question 20 and 21, which refer to this table here. So we have these firms L, M, N, O, P, and Q, and their respective market shares. And question 20 is asking us what is the percentage of the 4 firm concentration ratio. The answer is B, and I'll explain how we get B. So we have to add the market shares of the 4 largest firms. So that would be 50 plus 25 plus 10 plus 10, which will give us the 95%, right? So that's the 4 firm concentration ratio. So question 21 is also based on the table, and it's asking how would the market above be described based on the size of the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, or the HHI, and it's A, concentrated, B, not concentrated, C, slightly concentrated, or D, highly concentrated. The answer is D, highly concentrated. I'm going to show you how we get that. So the HHI, it measures market concentration. So to find it, we square each of the market shares, and then we're going to add those squared values. That's pretty much how you're going to figure out this HHI. So let's plug in the values. Let's scroll up so we can see what the values are. So for the HHI, we are going to square 10 plus, this will be 3 squared, plus 10 squared, plus 2 squared, plus 25 squared, plus 50 squared. Now please do not add all these values here and then square them. You're going to get the wrong answer. You have to square each one and then add. So what you'll get here would be 100 plus 9 plus 100 plus 4 plus 625 plus 2500, and that will give you a value of 3,338. And how we know that it's highly concentrated is because 3,338 is greater than 2,500. So if you didn't know, to interpret the values of HHI, when you have a value over 2,500, it's highly concentrated, tending to be like a monopoly. If the HHI is less than 1,500, it's a low concentration and tends towards being monopolistic competition. And if it's between 1,500 and 2,500, we have moderate concentration, like an oligopoly. So it's important for you to make note of those ranges to be able to interpret the HHI. And just a point to note, I found that within recent times, you see question 2 tending to ask about the 4 firm concentration ratio and the HHI. So I wouldn't be surprised if I see a question based on these 2 topics for your paper too. So please, when you're studying market structures, make sure you include 4 firm concentration ratio and the HHI in your studies as well. Okay, question 2 refers to the graph below, which shows a monopolistically competitive firm in the long run. And it's asking us to assume that the firm above is a profit maximizer. What is the area between Q0 and Q1 calls? So that's this area and the area referring to. The options are A. Break-even point, B. Shutdown point, C. Excess capacity, or D. Minimum efficiency scale. The answer is C. Excess capacity, right? And that occurs on your AC curve where you have where you're producing to the minimum point on the AC curve. That point there. Let me see if I could highlight it so you could see. This is what they're talking about there. This point on the curve, the AC curve, right? That's the excess capacity. Question 23. Which of the following is a cause of market failure? A. Externalities. B. Equilibrium. C. Scarcity. Or D. Elasticity. The answer is A. Externalities. Right, so externalities are a cause of market failure. Question 24. In the short run, firms will continue production provided they cover A. Total fixed costs, B. Marginal costs, C. Average variable costs, or D. Rent. The answer would be C. Average variable costs, and I explained a little while ago that we look at average variable costs to determine the shutdown point of firms. Question 25. Which of the following statements most accurately describes goods with positive externalities? A. They will not be provided in a command economy. B. They are non-rivalrous. C. They are underproduced in the free market economy. D. They are non-excludable. The answer is C. They are underproduced in the free market economy. So positive externalities, they tend to be underproduced in the free market, and that's why you'd find governments will have to step in to increase production of these types of goods. If you remember what positive externalities are, would be goods like education and healthcare. So you would find that governments would produce these goods in order to increase the production, because if left to the free market, they would be underproduced. Question 26. Profit maximizing firms decide to produce where A. Average revenue is equal to marginal cost, B. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, C. Total revenue is equal to opportunity cost, or D. Marginal revenue is equal to total cost. The answer is B. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So what you need to know is that regardless of the market structure, the profit maximizing position will always be where MR equals MC. So whether it's perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, whatever, it's MR equals MC. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That is the profit maximizing position for firms. Okay, question 27. Which of the following is not a characteristic of a perfectly competitive market? A. Many buyers and sellers. B. Firms make normal profits in the long run. C. Firms are price takers. D. Products are differentiated. The answer is D. Products are differentiated. So in perfect competition, products are homogeneous, meaning identical. So that would be the example of, let's say, tomatoes. When you go into the market, all the tomatoes look pretty much the same at every vendor's stall. There isn't any major significance between them to have them differentiated, right? They're homogeneous. I can't tell which farm the tomatoes came from, right? Look by looking at them from the different stalls. So that'll be an example for you to kind of remember what we mean by homogeneous. Or looking at, for example, let's say milk, right? If I get milk from different dairy farms, I can't tell by looking at the glass of the milk which milk came from which farm. It's homogeneous, looking the same. Question 28. The Herfindahl-Hirschman Index is a measure of A. Income distribution, B. Market concentration, C. Sales revenue, or D. Profitability. The answer is B. Market concentration. And I explained in detail a while ago about the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index and how you can interpret the value. Question 29. In which of the following market situations would a firm's pricing decisions be based on the reactions of other firms? So we have A, monopoly, B, imperfect competition, C, oligopoly, or D, perfect competition. The answer is C, oligopoly. So oligopolistic firms, they make decisions based on what other firms are doing. Right, so you could think back to Prisoner's Dilemma. Right, king demand curve, that's oligopoly. So they have to make their decisions based on what they think other firms are going to do. Question 30. Economic rent is defined as a payment to a factor excess of its transfer earnings, B factor equal to its opportunity cost, C landlord for the use of rented property, D firm for lease of capital equipment. The answer is A, payment of factor excess of its transfer earnings, and that's just a definition. Okay, question 31. If a firm increases its labor force from 20 to 21 employees, it is forced to increase its hourly wage rate from $30 to $31. What is the marginal cost of labor per hour? The answer is D. So I'm going to show you how you're going to get that answer. So the first thing we need to remember is that the marginal cost of labor is the extra cost of labor from hiring one more unit of labor. So with 20 workers, the firm was paying 20 by $30, which is $600 per hour. With the extra worker, the firm will now pay 21, right? Because that's the 21 workers by the new rate of $31. So that will give us $651 per hour. So the difference of 651 subtract $600, that's going to give us $51 per hour. So the marginal cost of labor per hour is $51. Question 32. Which of the following situations occur in a monopsony? A. The labor market is dominated by a strong labor force. B. The labor market is dominated by a few large firms. C. The labor market is dominated by a sole employer. Or D. The market is subject to labor laws. The answer is C. The labor market is dominated by a sole employer, not to be confused with monopoly. So monopoly is when we have one producer. With monopsony, we have one main employer. Question 33. The term asymmetric information indicates that information is A. Easily accessible, B. Evenly distributed, C. Not available freely, D. Unevenly distributed. The answer is D. Unevenly distributed. That's a definition type question. Question 34. The marginal revenue product MRP of a factor of production employed by a firm operating in an imperfectly competitive product market must eventually decline as more of the factors employed because A. Only its marginal physical product declines, B. Its marginal physical product and the marginal revenue of the product both decline, C. Its marginal cost increases, or D. Only the marginal revenue of the product declines. The answer is B. Its marginal physical product and the marginal revenue of the product both decline. So we have to remember here the equation for MRP. MRP is equal to the MPP times MR. So MRP is influenced by both the marginal physical product and marginal revenue of that product. Question 35. A backward bending supply curve of labor is one where beyond a certain point the supply of labor A increases as the wages increases, B increases as the demand for labor increases, C decreases as the wages increases, or D, decreases as the demand for labor increases? The answer is C, decreases as the wage increases. So what we have to remember here is that at higher wages, persons begin to substitute leisure for working, and that causes the shape of the backward bending supply curve. So let me draw the curve to refresh your memory, what it looks like. So here you will have quantity of hours worked, let's say, and here you will have wage, and your supply curve, or the backward bending supply curve, would look something like that. So if you notice at wages, you see when we go beyond this point here, notice the supply curve starts to go back, and that's because at higher wages, persons say, well, I don't need to work anymore, I could take more days off, I could relax because my wage is so high anyway. So question 36, a fall in price of a good which a firm produces causes a demand curve of labor for that firm to A, shift to the left, B, shift to the right, C, not shift but has a movement along it, D, shift but has no movement along it. The answer is B, shift to the right. So what we have to remember here is that the demand for labor is a derived demand, in that labor is not demanded for itself but for what it can produce. So the fall in the price of a good will lead to an increase in the quantity demanded of a good, which leads to more labor being demanded, and so the demand curve for labor will shift to the right. Question 37 refers to the following diagram of a Lorentz curve, and it's asking us the shaded portion of the diagram above can be used to measure A, the marginal rate of transformation, B, the Gini coefficient, C, marginal revenue product, or D, concentration ratio. The answer is B, Gini coefficient. Right, so what we have to remember here is this line here, the 45-degree line. Let me highlight it, this 45-degree line here. That is the line of perfect equality. And this curve line here, this is your Lorentz curve. So Lorentz curve is here. And this one is the line of perfect equality. Question 38. Insurance companies sometimes face a situation where their clients withhold pertinent information in order to obtain insurance coverage. This situation is associated with A, moral hazard, B, asymmetric information, C, adverse selection, or D, indifference analysis. The answer is B, asymmetric information. And this is just where you have one person having more information than the other, so it sets the person up for a disadvantage. The other person will have the advantage. Question 39. The factor of production land refers to A, the land used for planting crops, B, the land which buildings are located, C, all natural resources, D, the land used for planting crops as well as the land which buildings are located on. The answer is C, all natural resources. So land wouldn't just include the land that we plant crops on and we construct buildings on. It will include all the natural resources, even the sea. Even though it's not technically land, from an economic standpoint, we include all natural resources, including the sea, to fall under land as a factor of production. Question 40. Question 40. The closer the Gini coefficient is to 0, A, the more even the distribution of income, B, the more uneven the distribution of income, C, the greater the interest rates, or D, the higher the wage rate. The answer is A, the more even the distribution of income. So what you need to remember here is the closer the Gini coefficient is to 0, or sometimes you might see 0%, it's the more even the distribution. The closer it is to 1, or sometimes you would see 100%, the more uneven the distribution. So you have to remember that. Right? Sometimes you see questions like that asking about the Gini coefficient, and you have to be able to know the values, what they mean, whether it's closer to 0 or closer to 1, how to interpret it. Question 41. The higher the demand for houses and hence their price, the higher the demand for electricians. This concept explained above best describes A. Increase in quantity demanded, B. Increase in raw materials, C. Increase in demand, or D. Derived demand. The answer is D. Derived demand. So the labor is hired for what it can produce. So we're not just hiring electricians for style, we're hiring them because they are needed in the construction industry for the building of these houses. Question 42. Which of the following is a measure of poverty? A. Interest rates, B. Foreign direct investment, C. UNDP's Human Development Index, or D. Marginal social cost. The answer is C. The UNDP's Human Development Index. Right, that's definition. So measures of poverty, looking for HDI, poverty line, those kind of things. Question 43. The situation where a household's income falls below the average income level of the economy is referred to as A. Absolute poverty, B. Relative poverty, C. Poverty line, or D. Unemployment. The answer is B. Relative poverty. That's definition answer. Question 44. The situation where a worker switches from one job in a given location to a similar job in another location is referred to as A. Derived demand, B. Adverse selection, C. Occupational mobility, or D. Geographical mobility. Answer is D. Geographical mobility. Again, this is just definitions. And then question 45. Which of the following factors is likely to cause an increase in the wage rate of nurses? We have A. An increase in the market price of hospital services, B. An increase in immigrant nurses, C. An increase in the non-monetary benefits of nurses, D. An improvement in the working conditions of nurses. The answer will be A. And we can get this by process of elimination, because for the answers B, C, and D, they will all lead to an increase in the supply of nurses, which will lower the wages. So it has to be A. So thank you for completing this practice test with me. I will provide a link in the description so that you could access a free copy of this test. Also, registration is now open for those students who would like to take private tuition with me for the new academic year. Classes start the 2nd of August 2021, and I am offering Unit 1 Economics, Unit 2 Economics, Unit 1 Entrepreneurship, Unit 2 Entrepreneurship, and CSEC Principles of Business, CSEC Economics. So if you or anybody else you know who's interested in any of these classes, you could refer them to me, and I will put the link in the description for the registration form as well. And all the best in your upcoming exams, and remember to like, share, and subscribe.